Shetland really was at the crossroads of Scandinavia. There are a huge number of different influences, even on our dialect or place names. My own name is a Viking name. Modern concepts of what remoteness means are completely different to what that would have meant in the past, and I think it's quite important to reconnect with those ideas of different modes of transport and different ways of generating energy or generating industry. Fishing, the sea and aquaculture for Shetland are major industries, and they provide an opportunity for people to be able to have a revenue stream which allows them to remain in their community.
Hello and welcome to Crofting Matters. My name is Siobhan Macdonald and this is the Farm Advisory Service series where we discuss topics that matter in crofting. Delighted today to be joined by Osla Jamwal Fraser, Agricultural Advisor covering the Shetland Isles. We are recording on the last week of Ajax. How's it going, Osla?
We're getting there. It's been quite a smooth Ajax season actually. We've had no remapping this year, so and people have got their heads around the whole farm plan, so it's been quite a smooth one. But we of course still have all the people who are the last minute folk who it wouldn't matter when the deadline was, they would take it to the wire. They know who they are.
I'd be one of those too.
I probably would as well, Siobhan.
Yeah, we're the same. We're actually quite well ahead. I think, as you say, people have got their heads around the whole farm plan. Most people have two things in motion, and so it's definitely been a bit quicker to process this year, which is great. Yeah. And how are things on the croft at home?
At the moment, Dad is lambing still, and that's going quite well. We had a really rough spring, which everybody was very worried about because it was just so cold still. And we still had a sort of a sleety, snowy flurry yesterday. It's been really cold, but it's been drier and sunnier than I think we were expecting for the actual lambing, which of course here is a bit later than most other places. And then we'll be starting calving in a week or two, and that is our calving is quite late even for Shetland, just because my dad prefers to have the sort of to be safe in the knowledge that there is going to be grass for when he needs to turn them out. And what about yourself?
Yeah, so I am down to 7 ewes this year, so just with work and to make it a bit easier. And yeah, lambing went really well actually. They're mules, so they tend to have twins and triplets, but I only had one set of triplets and I had one death, so I managed to foster on a triplet. So they're in the garden just now, and I'm just hoping that's going to work. Nothing worse than a pet lamb. One pet lamb. If you have 10, it's not so bad. One, oh, nightmare.
Would you call them pet lambs?
Yes, what do you call them, Jen?
We call them caddy lambs.
Ah, yeah, okay.
I'm not sure if that's just a Shetland thing or whether that's...
No, I've seen that elsewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's nothing pet about them.
No. I can remember my mother would still deny this story, but I remember having a caddy as a child that was called Violet. And I can remember coming home from school one day and asking what was for dinner, and Mum said Violet was for dinner. And I was vaguely shocked for a minute, and then I sat down to dinner and thoroughly enjoyed Violet.
Poor Violet. So what, Osla, was your journey to becoming an agricultural advisor?
Probably quite a circuitous one. I began with a background in language and philosophy, and worked through university in catering and hospitality, and ran a cafe for a while after I graduated, and then went into teaching English as a foreign language, worked with refugees and asylum seekers, and did lots of things that nobody would have thought, least of all me, that I would end up being an agricultural advisor. I went and lived and worked in Italy for many years, initially teaching English as a foreign language and then moving into translation and interpreting. And that led me to sort of reconnect back to my food and drink background. And I worked with a lot of agritourism businesses and food and drink businesses and wineries, which then led to me training as a sommelier. And I specialised really in translation and interpreting, and then business advisory services for small businesses looking to reach a more international market in English-speaking countries.
Okay.
And then I moved back home and started working for our regional food group, which is part of the project run by Scotland Food and Drink to promote regional food groups in all the regions across Scotland. And those are member-based business support groups looking to support food and drink primary producers and value-added producers. That was a kind of a part-time role that I took on, and I took on also another part-time role with the Shetland Tourism Association, which is our kind of industry-facing tourism development agency, which again is a business support group for tourism businesses in Shetland. And again, that covered a lot of agritourism and food and drink businesses. And I suppose as well, just in rural communities, more so than bigger urban communities, you see the interconnectedness of all of the businesses and industries within your community. Because most businesses are not doing just one thing. They'll be doing several different things, and people will be constantly wearing different hats.
Yeah.
And juggling those different hats. I think that's a commonality across most rural communities, that from the outside, people will often say to me, oh, it must be so nice that you're back home now in Shetland and it'll be really quiet and lovely. I've never been so busy in my life. If you're doing it right, a rural community is one of the busiest places you can live because there are fewer people, so you have to cover more roles in your community, in your work, in your everyday life. It's just, I think that's one of the things I really like about island life, that you might end up doing anything.
Yes. Yeah.
And then, of course, like when I applied for this job, I I looked at the job advert and I thought that actually covers a lot of different food and drink things and agritourism, and I grew up on a croft and have some agricultural knowledge. I would really like to do that, but I actually didn't think I had a hope of getting it because I don't hold any sort of degree in agriculture, or I didn't go down the classic route. And so I applied for it and went through the recruitment process, and then I got it. And the first thing I thought was, oh my heavens, now I have to tell Dad. And he did raise one eyebrow and go, how are you qualified for that?
Yeah. But having that background, which makes me feel very inadequate, it, as you say, there are so many aspects to crofting and rural industries that I think you can pick up what you need to know, and a lot of the things that we're dealing with now are through bureaucracy, and there's a bit of paperwork and form filling. So if you're good at that, that's good. And then just your interest and love of crofting and being brought up in it, you'll pick things up really quickly.
I think one of the things I really like about rural communities is, as I've said, how sort of multi-talented and resourceful and resilient people are. And I don't think I maybe even realised that about myself or what my background had given me until I moved away from Shetland. And you quite regularly find yourself in situations where you might be doing something or talking to somebody about something in other situations, and they will say, how do you know how to do that? And I mean, I think that's a commonality across crofting communities, that you would tend to look at people and think, well, how do you not know how to do that? Because a crofting background really gives you, because you don't have the resources to call in a professional for everything that you need to do. And your location often means that even if you have the resources, you simply can't, because those professionals are not available. And so you have to learn, if you want something done, you have to learn how to do it. And you're kind of hardwired to look at a thing and figure out how you can do it rather than looking at a thing and thinking, I'm not able to do that. Possibly to an extent that makes us willing to take on things that only the mad would consider. But hey ho, here we are.
What I was going to ask you, what do you think are the aspects of crofting in Shetland that differ to the rest of Scotland? Is there a difference?
There's a lot that's very similar. I mean, a lot of the things that I've been talking about, I'm sure listeners will identify with, of that sort of having to wear multiple hats and having to be, if you're not on at least two committees, you're not doing it right. All of that kind of thing is very common to most rural communities where there is a massive amount of volunteer effort that goes on that makes our communities actually viable. There's a lot of multi-talented people across most of our rural communities. I think maybe some of the things that make Shetland a little bit different. One, we are, like many of our crofting communities, we're an island community, but we are just that little bit further away than most of the island communities. It's a 12 to 14 hour crossing from Aberdeen on the ferry. It's an hour's flight from Aberdeen or from Edinburgh or Glasgow. It's even like most island communities will have the issues around the increased haulage costs and the increased logistic difficulties, but I think Shetland really takes that to the extreme. Especially the outer isles in Shetland, where you're not just talking about getting inputs into Shetland, but you're then talking about getting them from the main port up to Unster, out to Walsa or out to Fula, which is a whole other level of logistic challenge and expense. Other things that are different are perhaps our connection with our maritime history, which again maybe is common to some of the other island communities, but I think how we look at maps is very, very important in that we are all used to seeing Shetland either in a box, somewhere it shouldn't be at all, or we're used to seeing the kind of BBC weather map starting from the south of England and we're way off in the distance at the top in a tiny little area. And actually, if you flip that map on its head and you look at where Shetland was back in the times of the Hanseatic League or when the fishing industry was at its zenith for the herring fisheries or for the cod fisheries, Shetland really was at the crossroads of Scandinavia. There are a huge number of different influences, even on our dialect or place names. My own name is a Viking name. Modern concepts of what remoteness means are completely different to what that would have meant in the past. And I think it's quite important to reconnect with those ideas of different modes of transport and different ways of generating energy or generating industry completely change what remote means. And I think we're probably about to see something very similar happening again with the energy industry. And certainly aquaculture has brought about big changes in our community. So I think there are differences because of our maritime history, and also the kind of level of prosperity that those different industries have brought to Shetland. We have a lot more owner-occupier crofters in Shetland than perhaps other areas. I was asking a colleague about this today, and we came to the conclusion that we're probably sitting somewhere near 50% of crofts are owner-occupier crofts or owned in some sense, whether they're landlords of a vacant croft or they're perhaps a wife is the landlord and her husband will be the tenant or some such family arrangement. But there are a lot more owner-occupier crofts here than elsewhere. And that partially is due to the history of people having access to other streams of income and being able to build up the prosperity that then allowed them to buy their crofts. And that has continued through. I mean, I have grown up, I've been very fortunate to grow up in Shetland during the sort of boom of the oil era, followed hot on the heels by aquaculture really getting going in Shetland. And aquaculture, I mean, it's changed over the years. When I was a kid, aquaculture was locally owned and there were multiple different smaller businesses. It's now, we're down to 2 companies that own most of the aquaculture in terms of salmon in Shetland. There's Cook Aquaculture and Scottish Sea Farms. We currently export about 80% of Scotland's mussel production comes out of Shetland,
Oh, goodness.
along with the rest of the sort of the inshore fisheries and the pelagic fisheries. And I mean, fishing the sea and aquaculture for Shetland are major industries, and they provide an opportunity for people to be able to have a revenue stream which allows them to remain in their community and allows them to maintain the family croft as a going concern, which I think maybe a lot of other areas have not been as fortunate as we have in having good opportunities to keep young families in the community to keep crofting going.
Yeah, yeah. I think the oil industry has made a big difference in lots of places. So people can croft for 2 weeks and work for 2 weeks. And um, you see that in lots of places. Actually, the oil industry has provided so much employment and allowed investment into crofting. It's amazing, yeah, and lots of young people then able to croft as well, and that work pattern has helped them to be able to do it. Yeah, you just have to do your lambing in 2 weeks instead of 2 months.
Yeah, it takes a bit of planning and working out how to get it all to work and how to get the balance right. But yeah, I would say it also leads to a kind of a mindset shift. I know I was certainly brought up to think of prosperity and wealth and well-being not in terms of material wealth, but in terms of the place that you have chosen to call home and the community that you have around you and the opportunity that crofting gives you to live in the most stunningly beautiful places. It's hard work, and there's a lot that goes into getting the balance right of making sure that you have an income that can support a family. But it's also a lifestyle that allows you the kind of freedom and to live in places that geographically are just so beautiful that I don't think there are many other types of lifestyle that allow you such opportunities.
You mentioned there landlords of vacant crofts, which is an issue everywhere. The crofting bill will sort that, of course, when it comes through. Is that a big issue in Shetland? Do you have, you've got lots of owner-occupier crofters, so has that thrown up some anomalies?
It has. We get quite complex crofting regulatory cases in Shetland just because of the sheer number of people who are owner occupiers and who sort of, through how families have chosen to hand on property or perhaps not being fully aware of the planning that it takes to hand it on, there are quite a lot of quirky situations which take a bit of figuring out in terms of helping people to then figure out how to move forwards from where they are. We also have an awful lot of deemed crofts in Shetland because of the owner occupancy status on crofts, because of course if you buy your croft you may or may not buy your apportionments, you may or may not, in Shetland, I know this isn't a thing elsewhere, but you may or may not buy your hill shares, or the right to graze your hill shares rather, and so that can create an ulterior level of complexity where people sometimes are not fully aware of what they have bought or their status on each of the different elements that they may or may not have bought. And so it adds a layer of complexity to our crofting regulatory work in helping people move forwards in an orderly fashion, especially when they're trying to do succession planning and trying to work out an equitable way of handing on land. We also have quite a lot of larger businesses in Shetland where people have perhaps over the years made businesses out of groupings of 3 or 4 or sometimes more crofts. Obviously, to make it a bigger enterprise and to make it commercially viable. But that then creates a situation where when people are handing on their business, do they want to hand on the business as an entity or do they want to split the crofts again between different children? So yeah, they're probably similar concerns to what people have in other areas, but there's just a little bit more complexity to some of the crofting regulatory business that we help people with.
Yeah, and hopefully the new crofting bill as well will prevent that split between owner-occupied crofts and tenanted shares, because it does, it just causes such confusion, doesn't it? And deemed crofts, nobody knows what that is. Nobody will ever know what that is.
I don't know who you're working with, Siobhan. Lots of our clients know perfectly well what a deemed croft is.
When we did our study tour to Ireland with crofters, and we had crofters from all the crofting counties come along, and it did seem that a lot of the Shetland folk had multiple crofts and were bigger businesses. That stood out. That was maybe just the people that were there. Of course, it was only a few folk.
No, I think it would be fair to say that we do have a lot of bigger businesses, often perhaps supplemented. If I think about the people who came along on that trip, they're people who perhaps have supplemented their crofting business with either contracting work or with acting as sort of intermediaries for buyers and sellers for livestock. They found a way to carve out a crofting business with a supplementary agricultural business that means that the whole thing can tick over and makes financial sense. And sometimes that might be something that's completely non-croft related that they have managed to add on as their alternative revenue stream, but sometimes it's also within the agricultural sector itself that they've managed to create a business that is multifaceted, and because of that it all ticks over and makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And how easy is it for young folk to get into crofting? If you have owner-occupied crofts, does that make it easier or harder?
I don't think it makes it easier or harder. I think in Shetland we are very lucky that we do have, especially in the last sort of 10 to 15 years, we've seen a lot of younger people keen to either get into crofting or to remain in crofting. We have a very active young farmers club in Shetland. And I think there is an appreciation amongst the young people of Shetland of how fortunate we are to have the opportunities that we have to have lived and grown up in such an amazing place. And people are keen to carry that on. A lot of those young people will be from crofting families and they will have an opportunity through their family to stay in crofting. It's less easy for young folk that maybe come from outside of crofting families to get a start. It's more difficult as well if you are looking to move into Shetland from outside, whether that's because you are a Shetlander who went away, like myself, and came back again, or whether you're somebody who's just attracted to an island community life. It's not necessarily easy to get into crofting. I know that the Scottish Land Matching Service is trying very hard to break down some of those barriers. But I know also that at the moment they certainly have a lot more people on the register for the Scottish Land Matching Service looking for crofts rather than people offering crofting opportunities.
Mm.
Maybe that's a piece of work that needs to be done around helping people to understand that that is an opportunity that they can offer, and helping them to understand as well that that opportunity doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be matched with some random person that they've no say over, but it is a process where people have quite a lot of control. So I think I see that as an opportunity to address some of those barriers. But I would certainly say that in Shetland, we are very lucky in the numbers of young people that we have expressing interest and actively getting involved in not just crofting directly, but also working as yardsmen at our local mart and working in our local abattoir, which we're very fortunate to have through the Shetland Livestock Marketing Group. Getting themselves into jobs such as going around and doing scanning or working as lammers at this period of the year. There's quite a lot of opportunity there if you are interested in agriculture, and there is also, a lot of opportunity there if you're interested in some of the conservation work that goes hand in hand with crofting and land management. We're seeing quite a lot of peatland restoration happening in Shetland at the moment. There's a lot of activity from the RSPB with their Species on the Edge project. So, if young people are interested in finding opportunities in what we term now the green economy, there's plenty of opportunity there and opportunities that would allow them to stay in their community that they grew up in, or indeed to move back or move to the community.
And do you have issues with vacant crofts or folk being non-resident?
We have fewer issues than elsewhere, again, partly because we do have healthy numbers of young people interested in it and keen to take on crofts. We also have healthy numbers of older folk who are keen to make sure that land is used, whether that is handing it on through an assignation or handing it on in a permanent sense, or whether that is allowing somebody looking for a start in the industry the seasonal use of it. I would say there's probably a little bit of resistance to sort of handing over land. I think that's not a Shetland problem or a crofting problem. That's just what people do to land and what land does to people. But we don't have abandoned croft land, and I think that would be echoed by a lot of, like, any time that any of the Crofting Commission delegates are up in Shetland, or also some of the people who travel around for the Rural Payments and Services Inspectorate. I think it's a noted difference that we don't have abandoned crofts in that sense. We do have abandoned croft houses, but the land itself is generally in use. How we maybe manage passing that on in a more permanent sense for people to have viable opportunities to build a life in a community is perhaps something that we need to look at and think about. But generally speaking, we don't have croftland that's just lying going rank.
And do your common grazings work well? Do you have committees in place?
I think we face a lot of the same challenges that people face elsewhere. There are common grazings with committees in place that work very well and that maybe have an ache scheme on their common grazing and do a lot of good work together. There are equally a lot of hills where they're struggling for active shareholders, either because people have just given up. They maybe don't have the same stock numbers that they had before and they don't need to graze their hill, or they maybe just lack the time or the skills to work the hill. We're struggling for a lot of the bigger hills. We're really struggling for the kind of flexibility that locally owned companies used to be able to provide in terms of giving people time off for community cars, for community gatherings. That goes back to what I was saying before. When I was a kid, our salmon companies were owned locally, and if you were working at the local salmon farm and you had to take a day off to go and gather in the hill, you were probably working for somebody who also was going to be at the community gathering, or at least who was also a crofter and who fully understood what your commitments were. Now that those companies are owned by corporations that are not local, there's less flexibility, much less flexibility. And there's also the issue, and this will be common to other areas as well, there's the issue of people having the knowledge of the terrain that they would once have had, the dog handling skills that they would have had. I mean, my dad is 73 and he still takes part in some of the bigger community hill cars. And he is sometimes one of the younger people on those pieces of work. So yeah, there's an aging demographic, and it's the skills that they hold and the dog handling skills and the knowledge of the land that they hold is something that we really need to be looking after, and finding ways to preserve that and promote people continuing with it. A lot of common grazings in Shetland do, of course, struggle for committees and having a person to appoint as a clerk. Something that we've seen would be the change that some of the wind farms have brought about in that, because suddenly some of the developments in terms of wind farms or also in terms of peatland restoration have brought about situations whereby it's suddenly more viable to think about your hill grazing as a going concern. So that's bringing changes of its own that will bring good and bad and indifferent with it.
One of my favourite comments on a feedback form from our Common Grazing Finance meetings was, "I'm so glad I attended this meeting. It's really helped with the spaceport." And I thought, where else would you get a comment like that for a common grazing? So yes, wind farms, eeks, and spaceports.
Yeah, it's I mean, again, I'm sure there's things in common with other areas, but it's one of the things I love about Shetland is just what batty combinations of traditional crofting and fishing life you will have combined with things like the Saxiford spaceport or with things like the Viking Energy wind farm. There's just an awful lot of different things that happen in Shetland that we take for granted because you're just used to incongruous things being mixed together, but actually are quite unique.
And I hope your dad's happy with his age being put out over the airwaves.
Yes, he'll be fine.
The other thing that Shetland has, which other places are envious of, is your health scheme and biosecurity. How does that work?
Our health status is something that is very unique, and we're very, very lucky to have that. And again, that is partially because we are geographically far away from everybody else, and we also only have one port of entry. So any livestock coming into Shetland or going out of Shetland does go through the main port in Lerwick. And we have a livestock cassette system whereby if you're shipping stock into or out of Shetland, it has to go on the livestock cassettes that go on the ferries. We don't have people bringing in any type of livestock in stock trailers. And that gives us a really unique opportunity to control what's coming in, particularly what's coming in. And we have a really effective Shetland animal health scheme, which is run and funded by our local council, which again is connected to some of the opportunities that we have in Shetland that perhaps other places are not fortunate enough to have the prosperity that we have had in recent decades. I don't think there are many councils across Scotland now that could countenance the expense of a Shetland animal of the Shetland Animal Health Scheme, which is run and delivered by the council, which allows us to dip everything that's coming in to make sure that we keep sheep scab out, which we have so far fortunately been able to do. We also had some very, very forward-thinking vets. The Shetland vets have long been working on different disease control schemes that are perhaps a little bit ahead of where other places have been, just because we do have that opportunity to very much keep under control what comes in and what goes out. So yeah, we're very fortunate in that. I know it's something that other areas, we had a delegation from the Western Isles who came up to have a look at our animal health scheme and the cassette system, and one of the main pieces of feedback that they gave us was that it was great. They were really admiring of it, but it's possibly not easy to replicate in other places where you have multiple entry points and different ways of getting there, and people can bring in livestock on trailers. And I mean, it's difficult enough in Shetland. I would say the vast majority of crofters are extremely supportive of the Shetland Animal Health Scheme.
So how are you enjoying this podcasting lark, Osla?
I think I'd rather be asking the questions, Siobhan.
In that case, would you like to do some more for the rest of the series? And if so, what sort of things do you fancy covering?
I think there's such an amazing range of different things that you could cover that are covered by the umbrella of Crofting Matters. As we said, it's such a multifaceted lifestyle to choose, I suppose. There are lots of different things that we could have a look at, some of which are kind of Shetland specific and some of which are broader interest. There's like lots of things that we can cover looking at those bigger industrial developments that are happening in Shetland and elsewhere. I know certainly other areas of the country are not exempt from having wind farms and things being built on them. So there's lots of things that we can look at about how crofting communities interact with those developments and how we can make sure that crofting communities maintain their integrity and their ownership of the places and the communities that we enjoy, while we develop new industries as well. I'd also like to have a look at the connections between Shetland's crofting community and our blue economy. The connections between our fisheries and our aquaculture and how those make crofting viable and crofting makes those viable. Another great thing to have a look at would be how that new crofting bill is going to actually play out on the ground and what that will mean for listeners across the crofting counties. And then there are lots of very specific Shetland things, like we have a lot of living heritage in Shetland that is quite unique. We have a lot of different varieties of things. Everybody obviously knows about Shetland ponies, but we also have Shetland Kye and Shetland sheep and Shetland kale and Shetland black tatties and Shetland eights. And a lot of those different things create different sorts of heritage crafts and events that are very much woven into the fabric of our crofting life in Shetland. And again, I imagine there are similarities with other places, but we might go on a little tour of different things like Shetland's endangered straw crafts, or what's being done to preserve Shetland cattle, and all of these kinds of things.
Brilliant, excellent, look forward to it. Well, thank you very much, Osla, for joining us today, and I'm sure you'll have a great time doing future podcasts. I will let you get back to form filling.
Thanks, Siobhan. Yes, another full day of IACS ahead of us until we get to the end of the week. The deadline is this at the end of the tunnel now.
Yes. Oh, thank you. If you'd like to know more about items we covered today, we have a podcast for that. So we have podcasts on the Scottish Land Matching Service, on succession, biosecurity, and deemed crofts. Links are in the show notes, or scroll through the Crofting Matters podcasts. and there are also lots of videos on crofting on the FAS YouTube channel. The Farm Advisory Service has many other podcasts that are worth subscribing to if you're a crofter or farming in the Highlands and Islands, such as Stock Talk and Thrill of the Hill. Thanks to Kerry Hammond for production and Kieran Sim for editing. Looking forward to Osla's episodes.
The Farm Advisory Service podcast. Audio advice on livestock, crops and soils, environment, rural business and more. Brought to you in association with the Scottish Government.